Hey there! This is a spur-of-the-moment script I wrote in like 2 hours while I was in a fey mood, so that's why the shorter runtime. Also, the message I want to convey is very brief, short and sweet, not unlike a playthrough of Signalis. See what I did there? Signalis is a nearly perfect game that, ever since I finished playing it, has been #1 on my list of things to recommend to people. And I don't mean in the niche genre of survival horror, I mean #1 as a thing to recommend that can be consumed and enjoyed. When I find myself in a conversation where there are people asking what games they should try, I'll casually remind them that Signalis exists and that they should play it. And you should play it. Your parents should play it, if they are fans of sci-fi, horror, anime, or are vaguely aware of the concept of colored lights on a screen. I'd convince your grandparents or even your dog to play it, if I thought they knew how to hold a game controller. And also, some people just genuinely can't handle horror or depressing themes, so maybe don't play Signalis if you think it might kill you. But trust me when I say, you're missing out. So anyways, that's what this video is. A place for me to consolidate my feelings about Signalis so I can just link this video whenever I want to recommend it to someone. And the way I've decided to format this recommendation is to explain to you what I think you'll be getting out of a playthrough of Signalis. You know, outside of it being a contender for the best horror game ever made. I mean what you're gonna get out of it spiritually, alright? I'll start by attempting something very foolish, and that's try to sell you on Signalis without actually mentioning anything that appears inside the game. This is so I don't taint your opinion about anything beforehand, and I don't think this is a good way to try and make a video like this, but here I go anyways. Fans of Signalis will probably agree with me when I say that the best part of this game is its thought-provoking narrative and visuals, rather than the gameplay itself. If you've played this game, you'll understand what I mean by the following, but Signalis' story and the nature of how it's told makes it very difficult to talk about unless you're willing to do so at extreme length. Or, like in my case, you are aiming to be mercifully brief and potentially somewhat cryptic. It depends on how much information you're willing to preload onto someone. As for me, what I want for you, prospective Signalis player, is to engage with this story on your own first. That way, you can have an experience that was similar to the one that I had. So, feel free to turn this video off now if that's all I needed to do to convince you, but why don't I describe my experience? My experience I would endearingly refer to as a 24-hour period of utter detachment. Or if you prefer, a spiral into insanity, wherein I became the world's most prolific conspiracy theorist, with every single one of my overworked neurons sweating to try and unravel a story about robot anime girls in space. And you could have that experience too for roughly $27 Canadian, or however much that is in real dollars. This is the part of the script where I speculate now as to why this game was capable of having this effect on me, and also everyone else I've spoken to about it. Anyone I've heard of who's jumped into the Signalis pit has been very familiar with this concept of temporarily losing their mind. The game is full to the brim with evocative imagery and details that seem to contradict one another that you're practically forced to reconcile with what's happening in the story as you draw closer to the end. And just so that we're clear, I'm not trying to be overly facetious. I genuinely felt like a crazy person after beating Signalis, as it was the only thing that I could think about for an entire day. It was only after I exhaustively scrutinized every single thing that the writers had presented as a possible explanation that I was finally able to calm down and feel satisfied with the answers that I'd come up with. And even now, I can confidently say that I have overlooked many major details about this game's setting and characters. I also could have kept going, but then I would have had to have tried uploading this video from a padded cell. Signalis is the only piece of media that has had this profound effect on me, hence why I want you to have this experience. It manages to do mystery better than any mystery story that I've enjoyed, and it has more time and effort put into just its setting than the video games I would consider to have the best world building, which, nostalgia permitting, should probably make me reevaluate what my favorites even are. I imagine the writers of this game probably intended for their story to be interpreted in many ways, but maybe didn't anticipate the insane level of zeal and enthusiasm they would manage to inspire. And I think I can explain how this happened with a hasty analogy. Our brains, humans, and maybe robots now too, are particularly good at creating and recognizing patterns. Under the right conditions, though, you could view this strength as a potential weakness, because as history has shown, it's exceptionally easy to perceive patterns in just about anything, if you really want to. Things like clouds or repeated numbers, vague descriptions that describe many things simultaneously, or a blank canvas left intentionally empty so that you can ascribe any meaning you want onto it. There are people out there who are very good at solving puzzles, even if many of the pieces are missing. Some others might feel deeply unsatisfied by the notion that the big picture that they're working towards can never be fully realized, no matter how hard they try. Others still will become completely unhinged, hyperfixating on those missing pieces and worrying their loved ones, as the only topic of conversation they can muster anymore are detailed explanations of what those pieces must look like in order for the big picture in their head to be complete. And yes, the latter describes the experience I want you to have with Signalis. The kind of experience you should have. You can trust me, alright? You want this. In fact, it's important for you to have this. Now let me explain why losing your mind is fun. There's a couple of good examples now of games which famously have stories that are a little more subtle and unconventional in how they're presented. Think Dark Souls, or a lot of horror games, really. Usually there isn't a character in these games that knows exactly everything that's going on with the story, and so there's no one there who can hold your hand and tell you what it is that you're seeing. And when someone does explain something to you, they might be lying, because that character is a part of the story, and they might be untrustworthy and don't really have good intentions for your character. Games like Dark Souls are written so that a casual observer may only pick up on little bits and pieces along the way, and so engaging with these games can often feel like they come with two distinct phases. The first phase would be your hopefully untainted first playthrough, learning the game's systems and getting a feel for the combat or solving puzzles. Meanwhile, the setting and the characters serve merely as a backdrop while you simply enjoy the game for what it is. This may not describe how everyone plays these games, but we're speaking generally here. The second phase is what comes after you finish. Your character defeats some guy you might remember from the opening cutscene, and then maybe sits down on a big chair, or does with his wife, and, something happens to conclude the story. And you are left there to pick up the pieces and wonder what the hell any of that even was. If the story's conclusion was interesting enough, you might feel inclined to look up a video to better explain the context that you were missing. Some people don't stop to analyze games as they play, and this could simply be because there wasn't a moment in that game that engaged them for long enough to spark their natural curiosity. This isn't anyone's fault. People are just different from each other. And this is where video essays can play a major role in supplementing the experience you've had, allowing you to learn more about the games that you've enjoyed, but maybe didn't recognize immediately just how much stuff was going on beneath the surface. And it can be a lot of fun to discover this hidden knowledge, and to parrot that knowledge back to your friends while conveniently leaving out whose opinion that was. I wouldn't blame anyone for doing this, because I know I've done it. And like I said, it's a lot of fun being able to talk about the things that you like, and being able to express your love of that thing in greater detail. Franchises like Dark Souls and Silent Hill are powerful vehicles for fostering this kind of feeling, which is why those games generate so many theories and debate amongst fans. It's all part of the fun, and because there's so much details in these games that you can potentially miss out on, it feels like there's an endless amount of satisfaction that you can pull out of these stories, depending on how much energy you're willing to put in. And in this aspect, Signalis blows all of these other games out of the water. I would even argue that this secondary phase that I'm describing, where you're analyzing the game's story, is actually more fun than playing the game itself in the case of Signalis. And that might sound controversial, like the actual game might be bad, but what I'm saying is that this is to the credit of the writers that they managed to accomplish this, which is ultimately why I decided to talk about this game without getting into any spoilers. But if I can contradict myself a bit here, I don't even think it's necessarily possible to spoil Signalis in the traditional sense. The true strength of its story is that it's going to engage with you on a personal level. I had already seen a good chunk of the latter half of this game, including the final boss and cutscene, and I don't think it significantly impacted the enjoyment I had uncovering the story. Anyone who starts this game is going to be walking into it with different perspectives based on their own personality and experiences. Some people will immediately notice the game's references to other survival horror, while many others won't if this is their first entry into the genre. Some will see a reference to real-life literature, while others may assume it's something within the game's universe. Fans of the cyberpunk genre will likely have opinions about themes of transhumanism, while others may simply think, what's going on with their feet? You could criticize Signalis for seemingly relying on these callbacks, but I don't think that knowing or not knowing these references is going to harm your experience in any way. If anything, the way that Signalis uses these references to build its own mythology is pretty fascinating, and the game will definitely offer up its own unique visually impressive moments. I do think that these little Easter eggs serve a bigger purpose though, as they play a role in engaging you to the story. There's so many nods to other media densely packed into this game that realistically, if you've been consuming stuff on the internet for any meaningful period of time, it would be extremely difficult for you not to catch at least one. Even if you don't instantly recognize where it comes from, the familiar sounds and visuals will activate your brain just long enough for you to get intrigued by what the game is trying to do. It's how Signalis starts sinking its hooks into you, and once you feel inclined to dig deeper, you're gonna have a hard time stopping. The reward for solving puzzles and progressing through the game is uncovering more scenes and more details about the world, as is the reward for doing subsequent playthroughs. So go and pick up a corkboard with some red string. You'll thank me later. Now that I've undoubtedly convinced you to buy and play Signalis, as well as pick up a copy of the game's soundtrack on vinyl, I want to briefly touch on a different reason I wanted to make this video. This is just a little challenge to you. When you do play this game, you should try to figure out what's going on with the story all on your own. I know I just finished saying that you can't spoil the game, but save those analytical videos for later. I don't want you to walk into the game with any preconceptions, as that might deny you the fun of constructing the story by yourself. It's kind of funny, but Signalis is actually the perfect example for something I tried to explain in my Final Fantasy VIII video. At the end of that video, I talk about a fan theory because it explains a version of the events of that game's story that's pretty close to the version that I came up with on my own. The ending of that game is pretty confusing, and it wasn't until I was an adult that I learned about a translation error that changes one moment of that game near the end into something that isn't quite as interesting to me. I received a bit of criticism in that part of the video because I make mention of a particular developer's interview that is often used to discredit that entire fan theory, and I was a bit callous in dismissing it. Also, it wasn't really the interview I was dismissing, so much as the notion that someone can tell you how to interpret a story for yourself. There's a favorite tweet of mine by one of the developers of Signalis, where she expresses a bit of consternation at people labeling certain endings of the game as being the good ending or the true ending, and I agree with this wholeheartedly. More so than any other game I've played, I feel like Signalis wants you to project your own thoughts and feelings onto it. When I think about Signalis, I am never thinking about it as a game, like how it felt to shoot the guns and finish off enemies, or how cool and stylized the art and lighting is, or how inventive the use of the game's radio was. I'm usually thinking about the plot and trying to imagine the story's events from the perspective of the other characters, or thinking about which themes work best for the version of the story that I've constructed in my head. And you know that a game has a satisfying story where, upon finishing, you eventually come to the bittersweet realization that you'll never be able to experience that game for the first time again. I would seriously trade away one of my 3 genie's wishes to unlearn everything I know about Signalis, just so that I can go back and play it again from the start. And I think I'll cap things off there. I don't really want to bog you down with any more unnecessary details. Feel free to take what I said here with a grain of salt, or even discount most of it if it's not to your liking. I'm not in the habit of making well-researched videos if you couldn't tell, just heavily opinionated ones. Anyways, that's all from me. Bye-bye. I love you.